Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan.
Yoda is widely seen as one of the most powerful and wise Jedi Grandmasters, not only during his era, but also in the history of the Order. Much of this is attributed to his almost 900 years of experience.
There are very few individuals in the galaxy who could say that they've witnessed history firsthand as Yoda.
It's even said that Grandmaster Yoda throughout his career has had the opportunity to train almost every Jedi who has walked through the halls of the Great Jedi Temple.
His leadership has been consequential to say the least, and we can praise him in many different ways, but if there is a single point of failure that destroyed the Jedi after tens of thousands of years of continued existence, it is him. And Yoda will even admit that he was the problem all along.
Failed, I have.
He admits to his own failure. Yoda, even at this very dark moment, is wise and humble enough to understand that it's because of him the Jedi Order has collapsed.
And let's be honest, it's pretty hard to attack his personality and character because there's not really much there to criticize.
I mean, we often talk about the temptations of power and how it corrupts basically everyone who holds on to it for long enough.
But it's something that Yoda handled exceptionally well. I mean, he never abused his power, he never let his ego dictate his actions. He always acted in a way that he thought would benefit the Jedi and the wider Republic.
Leadership is not easy. There are a lot of no-win situations that Yoda had to face throughout the years, and again, he did quite well.
But even well-intentioned leaders can lose perspective when they retain power for centuries. Over time, they cease to see their institutions as accountable or responsive to society, and instead come to regard them as monolithic, simply part of the natural order of the galaxy, or in this case, the Force. And to make things even more challenging for Yoda, his 900 years of experience was during a very strange period in galactic history, 1,000 years of continuous peace, brought in by the Ruusan Reformation.
And so Yoda, in his formative years, lived through the High Republic period. He lived during the golden age of the Jedi Order.
A period that was characterized by strong visionary chancellors who carefully wielded the Jedi as tools to bring civilization and hope to the wider galaxy. The Starlight Beacon, the optimism of expansion into the Outer Rim, these moments are seared into Yoda's mind. These were positive moments that showcased the true potential of the Republic. Even when they had the devastating war against the Nile Marauders, which shook the galaxy's faith in the institutions, the Jedi still ultimately ended the threat.
And when the High Republic period ultimately ended and the Outer Rim was more or less abandoned by the central government, the Republic that replaced it still had ideas.
When the public sector failed, the Republic pivoted towards private companies to develop the Outer Rim, leading to the Free Trade Zone Act.
In hindsight, that was obviously a terrible mistake,
as it allowed a handful of companies to grow at an exponential rate and corrupt the Senate. It also heavily disrupted labor markets in multiple industries, creating political and social chaos. But the Jedi are not policy experts. They're not economists.
Heck, I would argue that the Jedi, purposely bury their heads into the sand. I mean, they're very anti-scientific when it comes to a lot of things, including, like, the Force, right?
And perhaps most importantly, the Jedi of this era vowed to never get involved in politics or wield political power. One, because it corrupted the Jedi, or at least it could, but also because the chancellors of this period were relatively moral and compassionate individuals that could be trusted.
And so Yoda was more focused on training the Jedi,
making sure that they were perfect servants to the Republic, individually disciplined and balanced, ready to make a difference. The Republic for most of his life was just a liberal democracy that championed the rights of the individuals, that truly sought to make the galaxy a better place.
I mean, if you take a look at the United States 20 years earlier, it was pretty similar. We had presidential candidates that deeply respected each other and avoided, kind of low blows, ad hominem attacks and debates and stuff like that. We had political parties that kept their extreme fringes in check. And more or less, for the average voter, we didn't necessarily care who won most of the times because we felt safe with either candidate.
There was a complete lack of cynicism, a lack of hatred, except in the fringes.
Most people believed that even if their president wasn't in power right now, they could win the next election. There was never a crisis when the other party won. And unfortunately, such systems that have high levels of trust throughout society are highly susceptible to malicious individuals who will use those very freedoms and political systems to basically destroy everything.
And that is exactly who the last Chancellor of the Republic was. Chief Palpatine. Grandmaster Yoda, given his experience, continued thinking that he was dealing with a normal High Republic-era leader, someone like Finis Valorum, perhaps ineffective, but still well-intentioned.
Someone that the Jedi could disagree with on day-to-day issues, but someone that they would never openly challenge in a public space.
We can say that Yoda was naive and foolish to not see who Chief Palpatine actually was, but again, he was 900 years old, man, and it's
pretty hard to change the views of an individual with that much experience. And as such, Yoda's Jedi Order was extremely conservative. It had a very rigid institutional structure. The Jedi had not encountered a Sith for 1,000 years, and so instead of training their members in how to spot dark side Force users by exposing them to Sith texts and mindset of the dark side, they merely locked away all the literature and information they had on the Sith. The Jedi truly believed that the Sith were completely gone, and so the thing that they were worried about more was their own members consuming this Sith knowledge and then being inspired by it and falling to the dark side. They made this extreme decision based on an inaccurate assumption that the Sith could even be eliminated. The Jedi talk about the dark side being unnatural is a fundamental misunderstanding of the Force. Because one only has to look at ancient Jedi history to see that after every Jedi schism, the Jedi believe they have eliminated all the dark side Force users, only to see the movement pop up again, either fueled by remnants of the last Jedi schism, or just organically grown dark side Force users driven by their own nature and corruption. And it's really this incorrect view of the Force, this inability to understand that the dark side was as natural as the light side, that put the Jedi in such a compromised position. Imagine if all those 4 Jedi sent to capture Khmer were at least familiar with the capabilities of a Sith fighter. They could have steeled themselves from that first Force scream he gave out. They could have understood that their own powers were being clouded by the vicious dark side energy flowing from Khmer. They might have even understood the potent capabilities of Cortosis had they had lectures on it. And even though Khmer killed so many of their own members, the end result of this whole ordeal was a Jedi cover-up. In order to protect the organization from its enemies within the Senate, they just pretended like nothing happened. And even when the Sith were clearly re-emerging in the galaxy, even as the Jedi tried to cover up all this stuff, Grandmaster Yoda ignored the threat, ignored the potential return of the Sith. And a similar thing happens when Maul appears and slays Qui-Gon Jinn. This is what 900 years of experience does. It makes you cautious. It makes you bide your time and wait for things to unfold. Because how many times in the last few centuries have, sightings of the Sith, turn out to be just shadows or just overstimulated imaginations? It's weird to call Yoda this because he's so old and wise, but he's very much a sweet summer child. His decision-making has been filtered through centuries of successful outcomes that reward patience and trusting the Republic. Yoda was never malicious. He just became intellectually lazy. He saw patterns, accepted those patterns, and then he just depended on those patterns instead of being present at the very moment the galaxy needed him. And so he missed a very crucial moment. You see, Yoda comes from an era that would have never trained someone like Anakin because he was too volatile, he was too old already, and the Jedi Order was not really desperate for more recruits. But Anakin's acceptance in the Order is a direct result of a Sith Lord killing Qui-Gon Jinn, creating a sympathy and respect for his last wish. The introduction of Anakin to the Order, the Chosen One, should have been a pivot point that awakened Yoda to this new reality they were facing. The rules had changed. The Force had done something that it had not done in centuries, and had spoken directly to the Order, given them a Chosen One who was supposed to deliver the Order from all this chaos and decline. And instead of adapting to Anakin, instead of understanding his needs, Yoda embraced doctrine, dogma. He became more strict. Yoda, surrounded by his trusted lieutenants Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, individuals who looked at the little green man as almost godlike, received no pushback. There's actually a moment where Qui-Gon Jinn was offered a position on the High Jedi Council. Yoda, to his credit, had seen how imbalanced his inner circle had become. They had all become not yes men, but they all were on the same page. And Qui-Gon Jinn was not. But unfortunately, that request came too late. And centuries of inaction allowed for the Sith to maneuver the Jedi into the ultimate trap when the Separatist crisis erupted. Just like the Nile Marauders crisis during the High Republic or the Stark Hyperspace War, the Jedi stepped into the role they always had. They supported the Republic blindly. They didn't ask the right questions or notice all the strange things happening around them. Like, where did this massive clone army come from? Where are all these Star Destroyers and Walkers coming from? The Jedi paid for it? We paid for it? Really? And that is because the Jedi leadership was increasingly showing its age at this point and its inability to operate in this new, dangerous world. And by the time the slow-moving Jedi Order had gathered the intel it needed to actually act against Palpatine, it was already too late. They were completely boxed in. Most of their knights and masters were deployed in the Outer Rim siege. Withdrawing them would look suspicious at best. At worst, it was treason. Abandoning the war effort at the most climactic point of the conflict. And then that final move against Palpatine, Yoda wasn't even in the room when his most powerful but also most rigid Lieutenant Mace Windu tried to kill Palpatine by himself.
Mace Windu had no patience for politics, and so he failed to see just how political it is to not only arrest the sitting chancellor without the support of the Senate, but to also execute him without a trial is completely crazy. These are the leaders that Yoda leaned on the most in those latter years, and Mace Windu was a really powerful and noble Jedi in a lot of ways, but he belonged on the battlefields, not in the high tower making decisions like this. George Lucas wrote the prequels in this way because he wanted to tell us something. That even though Yoda had all the trappings of a compassionate, noble, and wise leader, even an individual like him needs to be checked and balanced. The prequels was not some mystical tale about, the Force, like the original trilogy was. This was a warning to all of us living in democracies of how dangerous it is when you have people in power without checks and balances. Palpatine's most dangerous move was removing term limits and taking on special powers in order to save the galaxy from secession. And Yoda's greatest failure was just staying in power for too long and not stepping aside and letting someone younger and better suited for the moment to take over. George Lucas wanted us to become active participants in our own democracy, to question everything, including our own political party, including the political leaders that we love and trust and respect. Because ultimately, if we let our guard down, if we don't cherish the power that democracies give to their people, if we take it for granted and just follow patterns and allow people that we trust to make decisions without consequences, we stand to lose everything that is important. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.